So thank you, Nora and Teresa, first of all, for inviting us to participate in this season of the Meet the Expert series at GESIS. We are very happy to present the ESS in this context. I am Oschrat Hochmann, and I will be starting our lecture today, and Lukas Schanze will then follow and provide more details about round 10 and its implementation in Germany. I'd like to also thank the communication officer at ESS, Eric, for helping us in constructing this presentation, as well as my other team members, Carolina Hahn and Anja Böller. Without further ado, I'd like to present to you first some overview of the ESS, the European Social Survey, which is an academic cross-national survey that is measuring attitudes and behavior across Europe. Thus far, we've published 9 completed rounds of ESS conducted every 2 years since 2002 or 3 in 38 participating countries. The latest data set actually includes 29 of these. Round 10 data will be coming really soon. The first release of the data is planned for June 2020. This is due to the COVID-19 impact on our ability to conduct face-to-face interviews, that there has been a postponement in the normal time plan of the ESS. ESS is usually conducted or implemented in face-to-face interviews. Interview takes around 1 hour, and it has been thus far translated into 50 different languages. We have over 430,000 interviews completed all across Europe in the context of the ESS, and we are very proud of 192,000 registered users, of which some 65% are students. We are also very proud that over 5,000 academic publications in journal articles, books, working and conference papers have been published that all analyzed our published data. This is a map of Europe, not because I'm going to get you through a geography class, but rather in order to show you the number of participating countries and the number of rounds that they have participated in. You can see that Germany has been participating in all of the rounds thus far. As Jan Lukas will explain shortly, we've also been part of round 10 of the ESS. There are 19 countries that participated in at least 8 rounds of the ESS. And there are also a few countries who participated only in 1 round of the ESS thus far. Serbia, for example, is a new member of ESS, and we are hopeful that it would thus participate in the coming rounds as well. A little bit of the history of the ESS. It was first funded in 2001 by the European Commission. It then became a European Research Infrastructure Consortium in 2013, what we call ERIC, and is currently and has currently the highest number of members of any ERIC. ESS has also won some prizes over the time. It won a prize from the Descartes, and it won a prize for the Datastate Award. And these 2 prizes are very helpful for me because they kind of indicate how well the ESS has been able to fulfill its general aims, which are firstly to provide high quality data about stability and change in social, in political, in economic, and also in religious attitudes and behaviors of Europeans, and also to advance the state of the art in comparative cross-national survey methodology and promote their implementation. So ESS places a special focus on questionnaire development, translation, sampling, standards of data collection, and also data preparation and documentation. All of these things are made by or conducted by something that in the ESS language is called CST. This is the core scientific team, with 7 different institutions across the European Union in 6 different countries that creates a consortium of experts that make all the decisions associated with how best to implement the European Social Survey. Just a couple of points in this slide in addition that I'd like to mention. First, City University of London is the host of the ESS headquarters, HQ, and also the director of the ESS. And GESIS is not by mistake on this slide. It is so that GESIS is participating at the in the core scientific team, but it also has a different role, which is actually our role, namely the role of the national coordinators. Now, what do national coordinators do? In each participating country, the ESS is implemented by a national coordinator or a national coordinators team. And this means that ESS publishes survey specifications for each round, and we do our best to implement these, we the national coordinators, that is. We are here to make sure that our data meets the required standards of ESS. The specifications include, among others, guidelines for sampling, fieldwork, translation, data preparation, and also the data anonymization. Our job as ESS national coordinators also includes contributing to the general efforts of ESS dissemination activities. As part of this role, we, for example, organized in 2019 the 4th ESS International Conference here in Mannheim in cooperation with the University of Mannheim. We also translate the top-line booklet that ESS publishes regularly in English in order to make information from different ESS rounds available and accessible to German readers. This is all available, of course, on the ESS homepage. ESS Germany also has a social media Twitter account. If you do not follow us or didn't do that yet, please do feel free to do so. Next, I'd like to tell you a bit about the ESS questionnaire and its contents. Generally speaking, ESS questionnaire is composed of 2 components. There is the core questionnaire, which is repeated more or less exactly the same between the rounds. And there are 2 rotating modules in each round that rotate between rounds. The main component, the core questionnaire, includes a very large variety of different items, all of interest to political, to social, to psychological scientists, and also others. They are related to issues like media use, political interest and participation, social well-being, national and ethnic identity, and many more. Another important property of the ESS core questionnaire is that it provides quite detailed sociodemographic profiles of our respondents, which is of course important for our analysis as researchers. It also includes the human value scale developed by Shalom Schwartz. Now, as I mentioned, in each questionnaire, there are also 2 rotating modules that are being integrated. These represent around 30 questions on a single academic or policy concern within Europe, and these are suggested by the community. So if you have an interesting topic that you would like to create 30 items about and integrate into the ESS, you can do so yourself. I think for round 12, the deadline has just passed, but there will be, of course, another round. These are the rotating modules that have been in the ESS until now. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but I would like to stress, for example, the module on immigration, or the one on timing of life, as well as the module on understandings and evaluations of democracy, all have been implemented in the ESS more than once. The understandings and evaluation of democracy actually in the final round, in round 10, which will, as I mentioned, be published soon. Maybe another point to the rotating modules, these are submitted through a 2-step process to the ESS, and together with ESS, the selected 2 modules are being edited, improved, tested, and so on and so forth, and then translated into the languages of the member countries. I'm going to say a bit about the rotating modules of round 10 next, which are originally understandings and evaluations of democracy, which is, as I mentioned, a repeated module, and also a brand new module on digital social contacts in work and in family life. In ESS 10, we actually had an additional shorter rotating module on the coronavirus pandemic, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that briefly. One thing I wanted to stress about the evaluations of democracy module, although this is a replication, the module actually includes a couple of new items. And this is usually the case, so that even if someone would like to repeat an existing module, it is always possible to implement some new contents into that module. A bit of, or a couple of examples for the digital social contact in work and family life module, which is an exciting addition to the ESS. These are the kind of questions you might find there. So questions about the extent to which you would say that online and mobile communication makes people feel close to one another, attitudes towards this kind of communication, the way that respondents communicate with their parents, with their children digitally, and also some questions about how digital communication happens in the context of work. These are already the coronavirus questions that were added to the ESS in the context of the corona pandemic. You can see that ESS module on corona has 20, not 30 questions. 10 of them were suggested actually by us, national coordinators, together with CSD. And 10 were suggested again by the community, in this case, Konstas Genins and Mark Helbling from the University of Bamberg. Just briefly, a couple of questions you will find to the coronavirus in the ESS round 10. Coronavirus is the result of deliberate and concealed efforts of some government organizations. So some questions about conspiracy theory in relation to the pandemic. Then there are a couple of questions about how to prioritize between different policies in a time of a pandemic, and also some questions about the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. We also will provide data about whether or not respondents themselves had the coronavirus and about their vaccine intentions. Maybe before I give Jan Lukas the stage, a couple of notes more generally about ESS. I mentioned that already, but still again, ESS round 10 data will be released in June and November 2022 in the ESS homepage. And while you are there, you can also, of course, find all the data from previous rounds of ESS there. And how do you download the data? This is easily done with the ESS data wizard that is also accessible on the homepage. And one last note, ESS has now a new ESS bibliography tool that will, I think, be very helpful for you in your search for literature that is using ESS data. You can actually also use a couple of filters in order to get very exact results for your search. So this is where I stop. And Jan Lukas, please.
Thank you, Oshrat, for handing over to me. I would like to continue with the second part of our presentation, the ESS round 10 in Germany. I will talk about the design and a little bit about the implementation of this round in Germany. And if you're interested in results, we are happy to discuss those in the discussion Q&A following this presentation. So let's have a brief look at the starting point where we are with face-to-face surveys in Germany. You are probably all aware of the constant decline of response rates in face-to-face surveys in many European countries, in the USA over time. This situation is especially bad in Germany, we have to say. So we plotted two German social surveys. And as you can see, since the beginning of the ESS, there was a nearly constant decline of response rates over time. And this is not because we were more lazy or something. On the contrary, we actually invested much more effort. We try to contact those target persons more often that we cannot reach. We try to convince our target persons to take part. We invest a lot of time and effort in interview trainings, fieldwork monitoring. So costs have gone up in that time period, even more or even higher cost increases than inflation would predict. So there's a huge pressure on face-to-face and the so-called gold standard of survey methods. Having said that, it's still the case that the non-response bias is not as bad as response rate. So as the response rates is just the first number that we look at. If we look at the sample composition, if we look at gender, age distribution, the nationality, there's some fluctuation over time, but we cannot see a clear trend. So even though we reach less respondents as part of the gross sample, the data as such is still really good, and you can use the data without any hesitation. We would have liked to implement another face-to-face ESS in round 10, but then something happened that you might have heard of. We took this graph from a German media homepage. It shows the number of COVID infections for each day over time. And in 2020, the ESS should have been carried out round 10, and then the ESS decided to postpone this round by 1 year. So this was also done in Germany. We had already contracted the survey agency and decided to shift the start of feedback by 1 year to June 2021. And then in the meantime, we were busy in preparing the face-to-face materials. And then in October, the CST decided to offer countries the possibility to run ESS in self-completion modes if they consider the implementation of face-to-face impossible within 2021. And Germany was actually among the very first countries that made this decision. And we decided in early February to not implement ESS in face-to-face, but use the self-completion as an alternative. We made this decision together with our survey agency. And after that, we were really busy in preparing all the materials. In summer, as you can see, the numbers went down again, and we were somehow a bit unsure whether we made the right decision. We were really busy with preparing all the materials, so it's a lot of work to switch modes. And then in early October, a few days after the federal election in Germany took place, fieldwork for ESS round 10 started in self-completion. And you are probably all aware that the numbers again increased. So Omicron wave just started to build up, and we were quite happy with our decision and could finish the fieldwork within a few weeks until the end of the year. So while thinking about those decisions, a lot of questions were in our heads, and we tried to find some evidence and some answers. So with respect to the face-to-face mode, we were really asking ourselves whether target persons would be willing to allow an interviewer into their home. Even if the COVID numbers are rather low, there might be some hesitation for some respondents. So we were sure that there are respondents who would be willing to take part in the ESS. The ESS also offered the opportunity to conduct interviews via video, but still we were not sure whether the non-response bias wouldn't go up due to the pandemic. In the same time, the interviewers in Germany are rather old, let's say, so they are a bit older than in other countries, and we weren't sure whether they would be willing to contact multiple households for each day and really be a very vulnerable population, vulnerable to actually getting COVID throughout the process. So in the same time, the self-completion also comes with a lot of questions. So as I said, the sample composition in the ESS is quite okay for Germany. So we are confident with those samples. And we were unsure whether self-completion would deliver the same results with respect to level of education, with respect to literacy. So it's a higher burden for our target persons, for our respondents to actually conduct the interviews themselves. We were planning to have a long interview with them. So Oshrat said the face-to-face ESS usually takes 60 minutes. In Germany, it's even more. So it's roughly 70 minutes or higher. And the self-completion ESS still should have taken 50 minutes. And we weren't sure whether people would be willing to complete such a long survey on their smartphone or on the paper. And last but not least, we are always interested in the time series. So Oshrat showed you Germany took part in every round of the ESS so far. So what would happen to our time series? So would there be a lot of change due to the change of the mode of data collection? So we weren't making that decision without any prior information. So just to give you some examples, we looked at some statistics. We were lucky to take data from our partner survey, the Albus, and could see how the internet usage varies by age, for instance. So you can see more than half of all respondents older than 70 years don't use the internet frequently. So potentially some issues in reaching those respondents with a CAVI questionnaire. And also there's some differences by education. You can see on the left, on the right plot, that generally the number of persons using the internet went up over time, but still there's a difference with respect to the level of education. Some very important piece of information was coming from the European Value Study, a survey that was conducted by colleagues of ours. And in 2017, 2018, they compared face-to-face and mixed mode surveys. So for instance, they had a mixed mode survey with a matrix questionnaire, so a bit shorter, but then they also fielded the full EVS questionnaire in 2018. And they achieved a pretty good response rates of about 35% if you compare it to the face-to-face response rate. That's a little bit better, but still sample composition is better in face-to-face. So they had a slight edge with the face-to-face sample, but still the risk of non-response bias was similar across mixed mode and face-to-face. Generally, the mixed mode surveys in the EVS underrepresented young populations and immigrants. So immigrants are also a critical population for face-to-face surveys, but in face-to-face it was a bit better. And there was a strong overrepresentation of the highly educated population. And looking at other quality indicators, there's less item non-response in the face-to-face samples. And but the good news was, in respect to our time series, they found very few to no differences in substantive key variables. If you're interested in the EVS, there's also the paper that we quote down there on the page. The ESS also did their own research. So we were lucky that the CST implemented a push to web design in 3 European countries, Austria, Hungary, and Serbia, to prepare for the self-completion specifications. And they did 2 reminders for those samples and had unconditional and conditional incentives. The questionnaire was a bit shorter, it was about 20 minutes, but the response rates were quite good, again, between 35 to 40%. And the ESS came to the conclusion that the sample composition was reasonable. There was a comparable level of item non-response, even though in the self-completion samples, there was some more missing values for key items like the household composition or the sex of our respondents. So this is something, a kind of worry that the item non-response goes up in mixed mode surveys. Respondents using the PAPI were older or less educated, so confirming the results or the expectations that we had when looking at the Albus data. And there's also a presentation by our director, Rory Fitzgerald, on YouTube if you want to have a look at this pilot study and some results. I'm happy to go there after our presentation. So a few weeks later, so I think it was in April or something, April 2020, the ESS ERIC published its first self-completion design for all countries that decided to go for this mode. They wanted to have a mixed mode, CAVI-PAPI, push to web design. So PAPI questionnaires were sent with the second reminder. In the beginning, target persons only had the chance to participate at online. 3 standardized reminders had to be sent in total. So a first reminder after the first week, after the third week, the second reminder, and the last reminder after week 5. So the intention was to really create some urgency in the beginning and indicate that this is really an important survey and you need to take part. The ESS said that small unconditional prepaid incentives were mandatory. And in addition, the countries were recommended to actually issue a conditional incentive. So if you take part, you get additional money. One interesting thing they implemented, or they recommended, a CAVI soft launch. So we contacted 200 target persons 2 weeks ahead of the start of fieldwork to check our processes and our programming of the CAVI questionnaire. So if you step back for a second and think about some differences between the two modes, but generally we have less capacity to motivate our target persons during the fieldwork. We have trained, experienced interviewers who know how to convince reluctant target persons, for instance. So the ESS and we as a national team had to put much more emphasis on the letters, on the first letter and on the 3 reminders. So how to formulate the urgency to take part, the advantages, how to convey that the data is safe, data protection rules are followed. Also, the incentives are much more important. And during the fieldwork, we have much less control over ineligibility, whether persons are actually living in a private household and should take part or not. We know less about our non-contact, so we have a higher number of people that we do not have any contact with. We don't less about the reasons why people don't take part, and we don't know whether the right person actually takes part. In Germany, we have some mean to control the sample with our register, so we have some control over that one, but still there can be within household substitution, and in the end you can't take the data because it's not a probability-based sample for that sample unit. And the last difference, for the first time, respondents see and read all our questions. So if you are a little bit familiar with the ESS uses show cards, and that those are printed questions, and the respondent in the face-to-face interview gets a printout for some questions. And those show cards actually could help us to limit the mode differences between face-to-face and mixed mode. So just have a look at the questionnaire. Oshrat already talked about the contents. The ESS ERIC shortened the ESS questionnaire to some extent. I will talk briefly about this one. And we as an NC team filled in our adapted translations. So we had to change the questions here and there. And the CAVI layout, so the CAVI online questionnaire was mobile optimized, so people could take part on a smartphone, on a computer without any trouble to see all the questions, all the contents. So this was like another requirement. So in terms of changes, the Schwartz value scale was cut. So no human value scale, unfortunately. We didn't collect any information on parental education. There's no methodological research with respect to the features of items, no MTMM questions. And a last interesting change, the order of questions was changed a little bit. So we started the questionnaire with a few items on the COVID pandemic to show our respondents like that the questionnaire is relevant and deals with relevant topics. The questionnaire is online, so if you want to have a look, it's available on the homepage of the ESS. So just the last slide on the questionnaire with respect to item non-response. That's always really important, whether you show the respondents the option to say don't know or I don't want to answer. And in the ESS, the decision was made to not show any don't know or refusal categories, but inform respondents at the beginning of the questionnaire that they should leave questions blank if they don't know the answer or didn't want to give it. So that's like a design question that has an impact on your item non-response rate in the end. In ESS, in Germany, we decided to make the most out of it and of this mode switch, and decided to implement 3 different experiments. And the first experiment is with respect to the mode of contact. So we decided to split the population older than 60 years into 2, and 50% of those were contacted with the usual push to web approach. So they just got the questionnaire, the paper questionnaire with the second reminder, while the other 50% got the questionnaire with the very first letter. and could answer online or on paper if they like. Second, as I said, we have to put much more emphasis on convincing target persons with our written material. We designed a brief info leaflet and added those to our letters. So it conveys some information on why ESS is important, why individual participation is important, gives some examples from previous rounds, some results. And last but not least, we implemented an incentive experiment. So 1/3 of our gross sample only got €5 prepaid. Another third got €5 prepaid plus €10 postpaid. And the last third got €5 prepaid plus €10 postpaid. But those were only informed about the postpaid incentive in the second reminder. If you look at the cell shares, they seem to be pretty low, especially for those older than 60 years. But due to the switch of modes, we were able to contact many more respondents or many more target persons than we usually do. So if you multiply those shares with our gross sample size of about 24,000, you will get a decent number of target persons within each cell. So let's come to a preliminary conclusion, I have to say. So switching modes requires a lot of decisions and a lot of hard work within the CST, but also within our team. We were really busy in preparing those questionnaires and all the letters to our target persons. We can say that it is possible to run the ESS with a 50-minute questionnaire in self-completion modes in Germany. So we are quite happy with the outcomes, with the response rates, with the sample composition, also with the data quality. So our preliminary analysis are quite okay for those indicators. And talking about the ESS, the ESS, Eric, is obviously considering how to move on, whether to go back to the face-to-face. There are also countries that did a face-to-face survey this round. So potentially in the medium run, there might be some change, some self-completion ESS, but the next round will be a face-to-face survey, and there are many aspects to consider and many things to test, not only in Germany, but also in other countries within Europe. And let's see what the future will bring. So thank you very much for your attention.